Welcome to another episode of the Getting Defensive podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kalat. How you doing?
Good afternoon. I'm good. How are you, Jerry?
I'm doing great. Another day in paradise. Thank you.
And just before we started recording, I saw you've got a little kitten running around, so that's pretty cool.
He may make a surprise guest appearance, so I apologize, and you can thank me all at the same time for if that happens. So, yes.
Well, he's more adorable than you and I, so we'd rather probably see the kitten.
That's true. That's true.
Anyway.
All right. Just quickly before we get into the discussion, the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers, even though some of us don't have employers. Hint, hint, hint. So anyway, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce our guest for today.
Excellent. Thank you. And we got a really cool guest who I'm going to try to help with, but I fear this is quickly going to get past my skill set, but I'll do my best. So today we've got Sophie Schmeig. Schmieg. Oh, I was so close. I'm so sorry. To joining us on the show. A well-known cryptography expert. She's currently leading applied cryptography at Google, which is pretty cool. Focuses a lot of her work on post-quantum cryptography, including Google's transition to those advanced cryptographic methods to address challenges posed by quantum computing, which in theory could break most of our current encryption in a very trivial time. Before that, she earned her PhD in algebraic geometry from the University of Ulm in Germany. Also authors a highly regarded blog on the topic of cryptography called Key Material, which we will link to in our show notes below. So please welcome Sophie to the show. How did I do? Did I get that mostly right, aside from the name?
Yeah. Everything correct.
Did I miss anything important?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, welcome.
Welcome. So I'm interested to know how you ended up getting into cryptography. That's not a something everybody. I know lots of security people. I don't know many cryptographers.
Yes. Cryptography is like a kind of a weird sub area of security that like has many paths into it, but they're not very straightforward from security engineering per se. Like for me personally, it was like I was studying mathematics. I was doing like my PhD, and Ulm is not the largest university, so we didn't have cryptography there. And but we still need to teach cryptography to like undergrads and so on. So that was like something that either the complexity theory professor did or the algebraic geometry professors did. And so it was my turn to TA that course, and I was like, yeah, but that's not how this really works, right? Sort of like I know enough to know that this is not how you can do this. And so I started like sort of on the side reading books on the topic, and like with that sort of like got into things there. I didn't actually get into cryptography until quite a bit later, like officially get into cryptography until a bit later, when I started at Google. I first was in a product team there doing things at search ads. And then when I was looking for another team, I saw that the cryptography team was hiring, and I was like, this looks like something that I'm very passionate about. So I applied there, and they were very enthusiastic about having me on board. And so I was like, yeah, that sounds great. And then somehow from there, I ended up leading the whole thing after a few years, which, was another story. But yeah, something that is important is that this is one way to get into cryptography. There are others, like the person who hired me, Tai Duang, who is also amazing, who since then has like left Google for his own company. He, as far as I know, hasn't even finished college. Like he just started to get into cryptography by finding vulnerabilities in SSL, which is also a way to get into cryptography. Like there's more than one path.
Interesting. And so how did you pivot in specifically into quantum cryptography?
Yeah, so this was something that was like as a topic developing, and it was clear that we needed some program to look into this. And the nice thing about being like a classically trained mathematician, especially in like algebraic geometry, is that these algorithms that are proposed are sort of like, they fall into a lot of parts that like classical mathematicians will know stuff about, and sort of like this kind of, I have approximate knowledge of a lot of these things. And so that then was like, okay, I can look at these algorithms and like sort of get into them, and sort of use the fact that I'm not specialized into any specific one of these, but sort of have a fairly general but still fairly deep understanding of the whole way that these things work. And that's how I ended up doing a lot of quantum like PQC stuff, and yeah, that got me where I am today.
So I think, it's hard to not be aware of the, I think that the impending threat that quantum computing poses on classical cryptography. So what do you think the average security person should know, based on where we're at today, regarding quantum, the coming, I don't want to call it apocalypse, right? But the coming vulnerabilities of classical crypto with quantum coming online, and in particular the importance of adopting post-quantum crypto.
Yeah. So I think there's multiple things to be aware of as a general security engineer. I think the most important dynamic is that these algorithms aren't drop-in replacement for the stuff that we have today. We somehow got very, very lucky when like people did the original like things like RSA and elliptic curves, that they are very small. Like elliptic curves is like 32 bytes to 64 bytes and so on. Whereas the post-quantum stuff like starts at a kilobyte. So if the system has issues with size, it might make sense to start looking into this earlier rather than later, before there's a quantum computer. Like the problem in particular where this plays a big role is WebPTI, where we currently, as things go, we add like, I don't know, something like 7 signatures for TLS handshake. And so you can imagine that like you can't really do that anymore, and you might need to do a completely different approach. And all of these cases where you need a completely different approach, depending on how fast your ecosystem is moving, you might want to start like a few years in advance to like, with WebPTI, definitely a decade in advance before you do something substantial there, because it will just take a long time. That is, I think, one of the biggest arguments for like we need to look into things now, and what like people like security engineers should think about now is like, if you can change your stuff and you're not really caring about whether this is like 30 bytes or a kilobyte, you can probably wait for a few years. If you do care about these things, then you will have to try to move into that direction early on, because it will just take a long time. There's another argument that is often made of like store now, decrypt later attacks, of like, if something is encrypted now, the adversary might decrypt it like later, like 10 years down the line. Basically, since you're asking what kind of like a generic security engineer, how should they think about it? Anything that is not doing PQC cryptography by the time a quantum computer comes online, 2035 or something, what the typical estimates are, everything there is broken. And usually like security, we love to have like layered approaches where like we have several layers that sort of protect our assets. And oftentimes cryptography will be the only place where we have only a single layer. And that makes it a bit scary. So identifying the cases where I do care about someone who can build a quantum computer, which will not be your average ransomware group, I hope. Identifying the cases where this is sort of our single point of failure, identifying the cases where like this will take us a long time to fix, a long time to move. Those are the things that I think the generic security engineer should focus on, sort of like the standard threat modeling approach, basically. Do you care about this very, very fancy threat that is very real, but also maybe it is in your threat model, maybe it's not. But that is, I think, the main thing to sort of take away how to use threat model quantum computers correctly.
So is we...
So,
go ahead. Sorry. No, go ahead.
We're still figuring out this 2 interviewer process. It's occasionally we step on each other. I admittedly don't know a ton about cryptography. I know enough from an implementation standpoint. Like I've set up a lot of things. I learned to never roll my own cryptography because I'll fail. I learned that one. That's key. But you mentioned something that was interesting, which is that this isn't a drop-in replacement. Like this isn't a different algorithm or a different library or a different methodology. This is a different approach, as opposed to like, we saw over the years, a common streaming cryptography like RSA got replaced with AES or something like that. And that was kind of like, okay, you just got to pull out this algorithm library and drop in this one, or you got to update your settings to use it. It sounds like this is something very different, where they have different trade-offs and different focuses.
It depends. There are certainly cases where it's a drop-in replacement. There are certainly cases where, like, I don't know, software signatures is, I think, a great example. Software signatures, you don't really care how big your signature is. Like, you're signing something that is like a gigabyte-sized blob. Who cares whether your signature is 64 bytes or 200 bytes or a kilobyte? So in those cases, it will be a drop-in replacement. The main thing that is making this somewhat more have more friction is that we do have this place where you can have a quantitative change leading to a qualitative change. Like, there are cases where I can tolerate 64 bytes. I can't tolerate a kilobyte. Like, if you imagine like IP packet sizes and so on, don't necessarily align and so on. So the thing that is really scary is that it's like this really large factor in like how much bigger this stuff is. And yeah, you might have cases where it's a drop-in replacement, but like I think the main thing that like people should focus on right now is figuring out where we don't have these drop-in replacements, where it's not easy to do this, because then you need to like actually think about like what do I do instead? If it's a drop-in replacement, you just drop it in and call it a day.
Is this sort of like something that would come into play for like a performance versus security trade-off in terms of these large key signatures are too slow to verify for like an in-stream sort of encryption? As we think of it,
enough, the speed of them is okay. The speed of them is about comparable. It's mostly about bandwidth. It's mostly about like, can you, like, if you have like a round trip and so on, you might get into problems with like IP packet fragmentation. You might get into some other issues. Can you afford sending like especially given that like when signatures were 64 bytes, you kind of get into this habit of like, oh yeah, I still have another signature in there, sure, who cares? And now we are in this situation where like standard TLS handshake has 7 signatures, and we can't just make all of these a kilobyte in size. It would just no longer fit.
Yeah, I guess you end up exceeding like the standard MTU size and blowing out your signature across multiple packets that would fragment, and I'm assuming that would be a problem.
Yes.
For my very limited understanding, I know I'm probably butchering this as a layman, so I apologize.
So what options are available today? I'm assuming that there are certain options available that today that people can adopt. And so where do those exist? Is that are there solutions, for example, for TLS and for let's say disk encryption and whatnot, and where are the kind of the gap areas?
Yeah, let's deal with disk encryption first because that is a simple one. Disk encryption is already quantum safe. Disk encryption is usually symmetric only, and symmetric cryptography is not affected by quantum computing, with some asterisks. If someone listens to this podcast who knows way too much about reverse algorithm, but we don't care about that one. Things like TLS handshakes and so on, or what is available today. NIST came out with just this August. They came out with 3 standards: ML-Chem, ML-DSA, and SLH-DSA. This is one encryption algorithm, or technically a Chem algorithm is one of these things where it breaks some things, and 2 signature algorithms. So those are the options available with a standard today. There's more that is sort of available or not available depending on your willingness to use non-standard cryptography. But those are the 3 main things. ML-Chem is for generic security engineers. Usually you will not use ML-Chem in its pure form. In its pure form, it is a very strange beast that it can encrypt messages as long as you don't care about what the message is. So it's something that is something more of a tool for cryptographers and protocol designers to then use to build actual stuff that people care about, put it in TLS and stuff like that. The signature schemes might be something that people have more contact with. Those are more drop-in replacements as well, which is nice because ML-Chem is a completely different approach than RSA encryption had, where you were able to choose what you wanted to encrypt. So the signature things, they're just a lot bigger. The main difference is MLDSA is using lattices. SLHDSA is using only hash functions. So they have a slightly different, slightly different thing that cryptographers care about. Otherwise, the main difference is that MLDSA is faster and smaller than SLHDSA. SLHDSA, basically, if I wake up one day and I find a paper that says that there's a flaw in MLDSA and it's broken, I would be surprised, but it wouldn't be shattering my worldview. If I woke up one day and found the same about SLHDSA, that would imply something fundamentally broken with mathematics itself. So if you want to go the very, very sure route, then you can use SLHDSA, which is bigger and is slower. MLDSA, very much still a secure scheme, and is somewhat smaller and faster. When it comes to TLS, since you mentioned that, there are a bunch of mostly draft RFCs currently underway that allow you to do this. You can actually, Google Chrome uses ML-Chem, and Google servers respond to that cipher suite, and Cloudflare does it well. So at this moment, if you want to experiment with it, basically you look up the RFC that draft RFC that describes how the ML-Chem TLS thing is implemented, and then you can just put that on your website and see what happens when Chrome tries to connect to it. If your website is behind Cloudflare, it should already happen. So if you sniff on the wire, you will see that the client hello is much larger these days than it used to be. But that is something that you can do fairly concretely. How much I would recommend it for the generic security engineer depends a lot on whether your idea is you want to test something, or your idea is this should be production stuff. like, and how comfortable you are with like fairly not necessarily as thoroughly documented algorithms and so on. So this stuff exists, it's implemented, it's in Boring SSL, it's in various other places. Standard is out there and so on, but it's not necessarily like super easy to plug it in. But it's getting there. It's certainly getting there. Like, yeah, from using it with various services, I think a very nice thing there.
Are these, this may be an odd or a bad question, but are these sorts of cipher suites compatible with like an implicit proxy or an explicit proxy inspection, and sort of like, hey, I want to terminate here, inspect it, and then pass it on like a lot of companies do?
So, yeah, we broke a lot of middleware when we rolled this out.
Yeah.
Technically, there is nothing that keeps your middleware from doing the same thing as before, as long as it understands the handshake. Like it, yeah, it really depends on what the like whether the inspection is like how the inspection is decrypting things. In some cases, the inspection server will like terminate the TLS session to begin with, so it won't negotiate the PQC handshake. But like even there, it broke some things because people assumed that the client hello was much smaller in size than it ended up being with PQC in there. So yeah, it kind of is an it depends answer of like, yes, technically it still works, but we also broke a lot of stuff. So
sounds like the technology would have to support those.
Yeah, if you want to have then still have PQC end to end. Like basically, if the middleware just like basically what would happen most of the time, I think, is that the middleware server would try to terminate the TLS connection, would not advertise any PQC schemes, so the client doesn't choose the PQC schemes, and then when forwarding the connection, will also not advertise any PQC schemes. So you just like if it's correctly implemented, it should work. It will just not be PQC.
Yeah, that's fair. And I know TLS 1.3 and its default configuration is breaking a lot of middleware by design anyway. So yes. I think we as an industry have a larger problem to solve anyway as we move into newer streaming protocols. So interesting.
So you mentioned a couple of minutes ago that symmetric encryption was really not, with an asterisk, not really affected by quantum crypto, and I won't get into the asterisk. What other types of cryptography are impacted? I saw you earlier today, poking fun at quantum safe random number generators.
Oh yeah.
And then you've also mentioned hash functions for signing. So
yes,
what is the kind of the landscape look like?
So we basically, I mean, the thing is with quantum computers, the quantum computing people don't like it when I say that we know exactly one algorithm. They say that there are at least 12. But we have basically I guess two algorithms with the Grover search and Shor's algorithm. It so happens that Shor's algorithm happens to break RSA and elliptic curves, which is pretty much everything that isn't symmetric cryptography. It's not hash functions, it's not AES. More or less it's not Schmieg, given that it's just hash functions combined. Everything else, usually everything that mentions RSA, everything that mentions elliptic curves is impacted and is broken by a quantum computer. You mentioned me poking fun at quantum randomness. There are two things that depending on how nice you want to say it, want to capitalize a bit on the whole quantum craze. There's a quantum key agreement, quantum key distribution (QKD), and there's these quantum randomness generators. Basically, let's talk about the quantum randomness generators first. They or random number generators in a normal hardware will just sort of use the fact that they live in a noisy environment. Like they just use something where they like look at like least significant bits of some real life measurement, and that is random enough. Um, uh, uh, and you can make the argument that this is that you could technically compute what's happening there by like controlling the environment or something like that. The joke that I made was like, well, in this case, write a secret number on a piece of paper, set it on fire, and gives the salesperson the ashes and the smoke, and tell them to recover your secret. That is kinda more or less what happens here. Like, it's technically true that if you have like the smoke and the ashes, you could like follow every particle back and then reconstitute what's on the piece of paper. You can't do that though. In reality, you never have enough information. You don't you don't actually have the computing power to do this. Like it just doesn't work in real life. Like it's not possible to do. A quantum random number generator like uses the fact that like quantum physics has things where you lose that like asterisk of it's not possible in real life, and like can say that to the best of our knowledge it is not possible. Like there is no way, the universe doesn't allow you to look. The problem is that like I don't really care about whether or not physicists are happy. I care whether or not my system is secure. And for that, thermodynamics is plenty. Quantum key distribution is somewhat of a similar thing that is like, yeah, kind of trying to sell something that isn't necessarily very useful. Of like, that is like an idea of how to solve the problem that PQC is solving by using physics as well. And basically, what that would come down to is like every two communication partners need to have a specifically dedicated communication channel. Like you can't use your normal fiber optics cable. You can't we don't have an end-to-end way of securing this. So you either would decrypt at the router, or you would have like every pair has to have their own fixed channel. Using that, you can do something similar that like uses quantum physics that sort of proves that like if someone was eavesdropping, it would destroy this quantum state based on like this very, very, very like quantum physics understanding of like by observing something, it collapses the state. And the main counter argument there is that like if I have a secure cable between like a secure custom hardware connection between two endpoints, I can just secure that connection. Like this was never really the hard part. On top of that, like the usual distances that they can go is nowhere near enough for like the internet to work. So it's just a very complicated physical solution that has better alternatives with like PQC. Like sure, it's a kilobyte of data where it used to be 32 bytes, but I take a kilobyte of data over 32 bytes over having to make a new cable to every pair of connections that I care about. Like one thing might be a problem, the other thing is simply impossible. And so yeah, those are the kind of, yeah, it's a bit hard to be charitable to say what like the point is of these schemes without like kind of saying that they don't really work very well.
Makes sense.
So you had mentioned the year 2035 as I think, an expected timeline for when this threat would materialize. Can you say a bit more about that? And I ask that because every time I look at the news, Google or IBM or whoever is touting some new quantum breakthrough. Is that how confident does that number feel? Is it likely to come in much sooner, and where are you at on that?
There's definitely an error bar on that number. Yeah, I'm not a quantum physicist, as you might notice by by me trying to explain quantum physics before.
It's okay. Neither are we. So
yeah, like nobody
in
will
good
notice.
company.
But yeah, like there is a lot that still is to be done there. Like the main thing that they are like have done / getting close to this year was making sure, like the basic way that this is that this happens is you have physical qubits that like are these like instantiation of this quantum state. The problem is that quantum physics likes to deteriorate in these things, and they tend to go and decohere very quickly, and so you can't really use them to do any calculation. The main thing that they've done now is that they used like about 1,000 of these physical qubits and use them together to correct the errors that happens in the individual physical qubits to like simulate one logical qubit. So you have one bit operations. And they're getting close to this, like having one logical qubit step. What they've done, I think, this year was that they showed that with the quantum error correction, they can reduce the noise instead of adding more noise. Like if your quantum error correction adds more noise than it removes, then it won't help you much. So this is sort of the level that we are right now, where like we do have an idea of how this could work. We have some hardware that does some things, but at the moment, people are struggling with getting a single bit running. You will need about like 1,000 bits in order to do much of renown for cryptography. And looking at those timelines, people publish like quantum breakthroughs and quantum timelines that like often aim for 2030 and so on. If they accomplish everything on their timeline, then usually what they have at the end of the timeline is not quite yet the cryptographically relevant quantum computer. It's something that deserves the name quantum computer, but you need to have something of a specific size for breaking cryptography. The kind of awful thing is that you don't really have much of a warning time per se. Like you have either built a quantum computer that can break the cryptography or it can't. And so while we can like look at where the public stuff is going, we don't really have anything to gauge of like how far someone who's not sharing the state of their research is along in this. That being said, 35 sounds like a fairly reasonable estimate. Whether it will be before or after, I don't know.
So assuming we get there and they have an ability with a quantum computer to break current encryption, what does that practically look like? Is that just bringing that kind of breaking down to a manageable time frame? Is it instantaneous? Is it like what are we talking about as a threat exactly?
So the current best estimates, which is a bit speculation because like nobody has a quantum computer, but the best estimates are that it will take like maybe an hour or two to get the private key when you have a public key. So that means that if you like if you take this estimate and assume that it's correct, what you get is, assuming that like an adversary doesn't have like thousands of these machines but has like a few, they will be in a situation where they have to do a bit of a pick and choose. Every single TLS session does use perfect forward secrecy. So every single session requires the quantum computer to run anew. And like the last thing that the adversary wants is to spend their like $1 billion investment, decrypt some session, and then go, oh great, another cat video. So
Hold on now. Hold on. Cat videos are important.
They are, but most of them are available without encryption.
Fair point. I'll grant you that.
It really depends on like, it's a question of like, if I can spend 2 hours on my very, very expensive machine that can't do anything else in this meantime on breaking this thing, if that is something that I'm worried about, that an adversary might do this, then I'm in the threat model. And that means that encryption keys will mostly depend on, can the adversary tell whether or not this is an interesting session? Like if I can tell from metadata that this session likely contain, I don't know, something that I'm interested in that is 10 years old or something, then I might do that. One of the reasons why like I brought WebPKI in the very beginning and so on is because that is something where I'm a lot more worried about this threat materializing. Like decrypting another TLS session and getting another cat video. Sure, there's also some things where this is an actual threat, like getting some long-term key material or stuff like that. But we also know that like CA roots are very much long-lived and very much classical. And if I have those, I can process anyone I want. So, and that is 1 2-hour breaking of a CA root key. And then I can just do whatever I want for the foreseeable future. So there is a bit of a trade-off of like, how many keys does an adversary need to break? But yeah, so the most realistic way of that the current estimate is like something that used to be, well, until the sun becomes a red giant and consumes the earth, or is now 2 hours. So yeah, it's definitely much more practical.
Understood.
Interesting. Is there you've explained a couple of examples, but is there a way to think about prioritizing, where to apply quantum safe crypto? So as I think about it, the obvious answer is going to be things that still have value in 35 years, or not 35 years, in 10 years, right?
Yeah, so my main threat model usually includes like a couple of things. The first thing to think about is like, things that still have value in 10 years that I want to keep secret now. In part, encryption in transit, as I said, Chrome already does that. So that is something that is like doable at the moment, fairly straightforward, where Fairly is doing a lot of work there. The next thing to look at is things where I can't change my public key and I would like to be around for longer. That is mostly things like firmware signatures. If I have some device that is supposed to last longer than 10 years, that is supposed to have firmware that it verifies in a secure boot step, and that would be a problem if the secure boot thing was compromised. Those I might also want to look at sooner rather than later, just because, like if you put your public key into hardware, there is no way that you're going to rotate that one. And the last thing that I would prioritize is the other thing that I've already mentioned, of situations where it's very complicated to migrate, where it's getting into this like qualitative change instead of quantitative change. There, those I also would prioritize as much as possible, because some of these ecosystems, 10 years is sort of nothing.
Interesting. So I know this is going to be a hard question to answer, but when I look at the history of classical crypto, a lot of times it's fallen not through brute force, but through side channels and other weaknesses. And in particular, given that we don't yet have an actual quantum computer, what's your sense on how likely it is that what we're, the quantum safe algorithms that we're moving to today are not going to befall the same the same issues that we've seen in the past?
Yeah, so I mean, for one, we know that the stuff that we're moving today needs to have the same protection against side channels and so on. There is a way of sort of combining the two that some people argue is a good way to guard against this, called hybrids or composite, where you sort of do both the classical implementation and the new implementation, with the hopes that the classical implementation sort of stands secure against any threat that isn't quantum computer, and the quantum computers, and the PQC implementation sort of guards against the quantum computers. One thing that is very nice to see is that sort of while NIST did this competition to come up with these current standards, there has been a lot of lessons learned already from previous cryptography. So while they are certainly non-trivial to implement, and there are certainly side channels, that can bring down the whole thing, in a few ways they are easier to implement than classical cryptography was. Like, one of the most important things, in my opinion, is that when you look at things like RSA or elliptic curves, you need big integer calculations, and your usual big integer library is not constant time. If you look at MLChem or MLDSA, the only thing that it uses is MLChem uses 12-bit integers, so it fits very, very nicely in your 64-bit architecture, and from that point of view, is slightly easier to write in constant time than the other older cryptography was. That being said, it's still non-trivial to do that. We saw some side channel problems already with some of the earlier implementations. And yeah, there's certainly going to be a bit of a making sure that we don't have side channels in things. Especially hardware implementations is going to be very dicey there. What I'm saying about is easier to implement and guard against side channels kind of only applies to software implementations. Hardware implementations have some unique properties, and there's a lot of research that basically has to be done on how to do this correctly. That is another argument of starting sooner rather than later, because it took us quite a bit of time, several decades, to get it right for classical cryptography. So we don't quite have the same time this time around. So yeah, we should use the time as much as we can.
If I'm following correctly, it also seemed like if I've got something that may be relevant 10 years from now that is statically encrypted today, I don't plan on changing it, I may want to go back and re-encrypt that with post-quantum keys.
So
it go backwards in time too, right?
Yeah. So especially when it comes to these things, I think something else that is sort of this more for qualitative change that I think is a good thing that we should do anyway, is actually using this as a opportunity to make our key hygiene better, rotate our keys more frequently and stuff like that. If I have some super secret stuff, my keys, and I never rotate them, and so now I'm scared that my keys get leaked because I never rotate them, and so they are in some transmissions that were not protected with PQC. If you rotate your keys, you don't have to deal with that problem. Sort of the approach of maybe try to have less things that are super damaging to you 10 years down the line, especially things like cryptographic key material that you could rotate. You just like don't want to because it's a lot of error prone stuff and a lot of like headaches that come with rotating like these very basic keys. But I think there is a good opportunity here to like actually like also use it as a reason to make key hygiene better.
Makes sense.
Good point. I remember this is maybe tangential to the discussion, but I remember when we were going through the lead up to the implementation of GDPR in Europe. You know, one of the things that happens all too often, I'm just going to pick on a scenario. Hard drives end up at yard sales. Right? It happens too often. And one of the, I used to work at a cloud provider, and you know, one of the big fears I always had was, you know, somehow, some way, drives, you know, magically make their way out of, you know, out of the data center. No, we never had that happen, but it's not hard to think that it could happen. The GDPR, you know, I'm not an attorney. I won't try to claim to be one, but you know, they do point to encryption as being a meaningful mitigation to harm. And so if I go back to that hard drive at the yard sale scenario, now that hard drive is basically just on ice. I mean, theoretically, right? It's on ice until such a point that the encryption of it, assuming it is encrypted, is breakable. And so it seems to me like there's going to end up being another round of updates to regulations that say, you know, perhaps encryption isn't as big of a mitigation against harm when something is disclosed as maybe we thought about it in the past.
I mean, this is like, again, going back to the like symmetric cryptography is not really affected here, which
Right.
kind of makes this a little bit better, but you can very easily make this a problem of like, if the encryption key that is used to decrypt the hard drive was transmitted over like a non-quantum safe session, and if that transmission was intercepted by an adversary, and if this hardware was this hard drive was interesting enough for this adversary to actually spend their 2 hours on their quantum computer to decrypt, then yeah, this is like a typical cryptography problem of like cryptography being a way of transforming every problem into a key management problem, but then not really telling you how to manage your keys. So yeah, there's definitely a way in which, like, yes, it is secure and the data is sort of not accessible if it's encrypted, but only as long as this key is secure. So you kind of exchanged keeping your hard drive secure to keeping this hopefully much smaller, much easier to secure key secure. But yeah, there's definitely a problem in like saying like encryption by itself is only a mitigation against like disclosure if you didn't know where your key has been at, if like the algorithms don't end up broken. I don't think that there's much of a risk for symmetric cryptography to be broken, just based on how the history has been going. And like, yeah, but as we've seen, there's certainly some threats to asymmetric cryptography that exist. And yeah, it's hard to say that this is a meaningful mitigation against disclosure if I can get around it.
Interesting. Yeah, good point, you know, on hard drive encryption being symmetric. Yes. Sorry, I have a cat using me as a jungle gym.
It's something that I definitely had to think about.
So this has been a pretty interesting discussion. Anything else that you had to ask, Andy?
No, I feel well out of my depth on this topic, so I would just be curious, Sophie, any other key things we didn't ask that you'd want to share with a fairly skilled security audience, but not somebody who's deep into cryptography like you are?
I think we covered most of the things that I can think of. Like, yeah, we talked about the threat model at length. We talked about the replacements. Yeah, I think we've covered the things that I usually address with an audience like this.
Great.
Awesome.
And yeah, we appreciate it. And I'm sorry Jerry was having an attack by a feline through part of the show. It's a side share attack, as we call it. And there he is. Sorry. I'm a softie for cats. Cool.
So where, if people wanted to learn more about you and your work, Sophie, where could they find out more about you?
I guess Mastodon on your excellent instance. And yeah, my blog, you mentioned that, and I guess I'm at various conferences, though mostly at cryptography conferences, but I was meaning to show up at the more general conferences at some point. But yeah.
All right,
That is
I will.
where most of my work happens.
I'll include a link to your Mastodon account and to your blog in the show notes.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. This was not something that we have really ever gotten deep into, so this was for me very enlightening, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it was fun to be here.
Thanks so much. And I appreciate it. Jerry, you want to close us out, or are you wrangling cats?
Cat dancing on keyboard. Anyway, thank you everybody for listening. You can find the show notes for this episode and all of our other episodes on our website at gettingdefensive.com. You can follow me on Mastodon at Jerry at infosec.exchange. And where can they follow you, Mr.
I
Kalat?
think it was Sophie Schmeig at infosec.exchange.
Yep.
Awesome.
And
what
I'm
about
at
you, Andy?
Lerg, L-E-R-G, at infosec.exchange.
Awesome. We will talk again real soon. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.